first session of the 2024 Ohio State University Extension Beef Team's virtual beef school was hosted via Zoom on January 18th. This year's 4-evening beef school sessions are taking a deep dive into production practices and factors that impact quality and profitability when it comes to producing beef to be marketed directly to consumers. The first session was focused on genetic selection and planned calving to better meet the demands for locally grown and marketed beef. Featured speakers for the evening included Gahler, OSU Extension Educator in Sandusky County, and Dean Kreager, OSU Extension Educator in Licking County. Listen in as OSU Extension Beef Field Specialist Garth Ruff introduces this evening's second speaker.
Appreciate everybody for logging in and joining us for night one of our winter beef webinar series. This winter kind of have a more of a focused approach. Going to hone in on producing local beef and meeting some of that local demand across the state. I'm Garth Ruff, beef cattle field specialist for OSU Extension. We've got a great panel of speakers, I think, here for the next 4 webinars. January through April. And with that, we're going to turn this over to Dean Kreager. Dean's the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Licking County. Kind of go and put a little different spin on some of the calving season presentations we've given in the past. So Dean, turn this one over to you.
So tonight I'm going to be talking about planning your calving to meet the demand. And this is something that when Garth gave it to me, I wasn't quite sure where I was going to go with it. It took me a little bit of figuring out, but I think I've got a good path here. And we're going to walk through some different things that you need to be concerned about and how you can make all these pieces work together. So just to kind of give you an idea where we're going with this today, I'm going to talk some on first of all, and I'll talk on it a little bit too, about why do you want to raise local beef, just to make sure that this is something that really fits best into what you're doing. We're going to talk about matching your butcher appointments with your calving and why that's important. We'll talk about how long it's going to take to finish your animals. There's a lot of difference, and this all has to fit in with timing those calvings. Are you grain finishing? Are you doing a grass grain combo? Are you trying to do grass only? All these things are going to affect when you want to have those calves. We're going to get into a little bit of information on breeding season, and actually between the breeding season and the methods for timing your breeding season. That's going to take up most of this talk. The other part's going to be kind of short, but there may be some reasons to go year round, or maybe we should be looking at 1 or possibly 2 breeding seasons in a year. And then we're going to talk about how you can get to that point. How can you time those breeding seasons and what tools are available to do that? So to start in, why should we be raising beef for local sale? And everybody's got some different reasons. Starting in 2020, the demand got to be huge. People wanted local beef as much as possible, and that demand has continued. At this point, it seems pretty easy to get that local beef. Then we can look at, are we doing it because we are trying to get some extra income potential over just selling feeder calves? So, we can sell feeder calves. The price has been pretty good on those, but are we missing out on something if we aren't selling the freezer beef? Or the important thing to know here is, what is your cost to gain in order to get those from feeder calves up to beef that you're going to be selling? And are we making enough extra money to make it worth doing that? The other positive, you get to set the price. So you know what you're going to get for those animals when you sell them. That's agreed upon. You're not taking a chance taking them to the market that maybe you'll top the market, or maybe you'll be down in it quite a ways if you just market them through the conventional sale yard. There are some negatives to raising feeder beef. One of those negatives, some people may enjoy it, but gets to be challenging at times, is getting them marketed. Currently, it's pretty easy to market the local beef to people. They're looking for it, but as Al said, those situations could change at any point, and it may become difficult. There's a lot of work with consumers. If you're taking a number of beef in and you're selling them as freezer beef and quarters, wholes, halves, collecting money and working it with all the people with those split animals gets to be a little bit challenging at times. And what kind of facilities do you have? Do you have facilities that allow you to be able to feed out those animals easily, or are you better off selling as feeder calves until you can build the facilities where that you can feed out some cattle? All right, so this is just something to think about. I put out some calls as far as how far in advance you need to book appointments. You know, I don't know, what do you think? 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, over 9 months? Seems like in about 2020, things had gotten to where it was a year or more. And I still have been scheduling appointments about a year out, and I called a couple of processors, and they're recommending people call them a year in advance when they're trying to get their animals in to get them processed. So that's something that you really need to consider. You know, a few years ago, if you called 2 months ahead of time, you could get that animal in. It made it a little bit easier when you were trying to get them finished, that you could, you didn't have to be as informed about how long it was going to take to finish that animal, because you could watch, and when you got close, you could take them in. But now you need to know a year ahead of time how soon that animal is going to be ready to have a butcher appointment. Moving on to how you're finishing your beef. And this is something Garth will be more involved in the next section with finishing your beef to meet your target dates. But I'm putting it in here in my part, just a couple of slides just to touch on this, because it's important to know and take it back to when do you need to have those calves. So let's say we're grain finishing, or we're grass and grain finishing, or we're just doing a forage. How long is it going to take for each of those in order to have those animals ready? And the important thing is about the way we choose to do it, that we pick one and that we're good at it. Customers like to have a consistent product, and when they are going to come back, they want to know what to expect the next time that they're going to come back. So just kind of putting things together, there's kind of 4 parts that we're going to look at today. And all of these kind of have to interfit into each other. And some of them are more important in some situations than others, but we're going to talk a little bit about demand. We mentioned butcher appointments. We're going to talk about calving seasons, and we talked a little bit about growth rates. So all those have to mesh together in order to be able to get that animal at the right point when we need it to, which is going to match up to when we need to have that animal born in order to do that. So demand can vary a lot. You know, when we look at small ruminants, we can see big ups and downs based on seasonal holidays, things like that. We don't have that type of situation with beef. So that up and down price, there is some up and down price seasonal, but we don't see it like we do in some other things. So when we look at our demand, if we're selling quarters, halves, and wholes, maybe we don't have to be as flexible. The demand may be there, and people may not have a time of year that they really feel that they need to have those. On the other hand, if we're selling at farmers markets or we're selling retail cuts, those may be more seasonal. We need to have that meat available when we're going to go to that farmers market, or when those holidays are hitting, the 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day. We might want to have a little bit more available at that point. Or if we happen to get in a situation where we're selling to restaurants, we may need to be having beef that's available year round in order to meet their needs. So that demand really is dependent on your situation. And I kind of mentioned this already as far as butcher appointments, that most places that I've talked to are still booking for a year ahead of time. What this means to us as producers is that we got to have appointments for calves a lot of times before we've even weaned them. And that gets to be a little bit of a challenge, especially when we're looking at trying to select out ones that we want to keep as replacements versus ones we want to go ahead and feed out. It gets to be a little bit of a challenge. And then we also need to know how old our cattle are going to be. So depending on what type of feeding plan that we're going to have, we need to know how long that's going to take to know when those animals are going to be ready to market. So just some kind of rules of thumb. If you are looking at a traditional raise the calves out on pasture till they're about 7 months, maybe do a little bit of backgrounding on them and then grain finish them. About 15 to 16 months of age is what we can expect those calves to be when they should be at a good point for marketing. If we're doing a little bit of a hybrid where we're feeding grain to finish them, but they're still out on pasture much of that time, it's going to take a few extra months, probably going to be about 16 to 20 months of age when those animals are ready to market. And then if we go with completely grass-fed, forage finished animals, looking at 24 to 30 months. And there's even some people who are going out beyond 30 months in order to get the amount of condition on them to provide some marbling in them. It's a long-term commitment. All right. So following that, what's the importance of having the correct size and finish? Well, the first important part of having them at that correct size and finish when we get rid of them or when we sell them to people is that we want those returning customers are going to have expectations and we want to meet those. So we don't want animals that are overfinished. Those overfinished animals obviously are going to be wasty, and people don't enjoy having too much extra finish on them. And when you fry hamburger in the frying pan, you have a bunch of grease that you have to deal with. They also don't want to have them underfinished. If we haven't got them up to the point where that they're getting marbling on them, then we're losing out on some quality at that point. And then if we are trying to hold one back so that we don't get it too fat, we run into problems with that too. And Garth will probably touch on that some when he has his talk, but it gets to be expensive because if you think about it, you have to provide a certain amount of nutrition to that animal just to reach their maintenance without reaching gain. And if we're holding and trying to limit the amount of gain, we're going to be feeding them a lot of pounds of feed that don't go to anything but just maintenance. And that can be expensive. It also can have effects on the quality of the carcass in the long run. All right, so we're going to move a little into more of the calving end of things. So we're going to talk about calving seasons, maybe advantages and disadvantages of some of your options here. So maybe calving year-round seems good if you're raising freezer beef and you think, well, I can spread out my butcher dates throughout the year. I can have a more even cash flow and just kind of do it that way. But there are some things to consider that that you don't want to overlook. So if you have a year-round calving season, are you still getting one calf per every 12 months out of your cows? That's something to be concerned about. It's something we'll talk about here on a couple of slides down, but these beef cows are designed so that we can get one calf every 12 months. And sometimes if we are overlooking the management on having calving seasons, we may be just having that bull out there and he's breeding the cows whenever he gets around to it, or whenever those cows begin cycling, and getting them to cycle at the right time might be a challenge if we aren't meeting all the nutritional requirements, which falls into this next point here, that do you have the ability to manage all the different ages of calves and the different production stages of the cows if you're going to have a year-round calving season? Because the needs of the cow and the needs of the calves change with depending on the size of them and the stage of pregnancy with the cows. So this is just an example. If we've got a cow that weighs 1,300 pounds and she's in the middle third of her pregnancy, so the second trimester, the requirements of that cow are to have about a 50% TDN, and TDN is a combination of starch, fiber, protein, and fat that are in that diet, and then a 7.5% crude protein. And this is the point when that cow is the lowest in her nutritional requirements. Now, if we look at when she's in the highest in her nutritional requirements during her first 90 days after having a calf, that TDN number jumps from 50% to 60%, and that crude protein goes from 7.5 to 11. So another way to look at this is on this next slide. And we can look at this, you see the months since calving go along the bottom. So when that cow calves, we're right over here at this point. And you can see the TDN, those two total digestible nutrients, are on the brown line, the crude proteins on the blue line. And this is what their needs are throughout their yearly cycle after having that calf. You can see that they, as they have that calf and their milk production goes up, their need for protein and total digestible nutrients goes up, and then it slowly starts coming down throughout their first trimester. When you hit that second trimester, you're also weaning the calves. Their needs go way down. That's the point where that we can put weight back on a cow if we need to, and then they start going up again as we hit the end, and we reach a point where that we need to get more energy and more protein that are going into the development of that fetus. So on here, I've got marked where the second trimester is, just to kind of point out the difference in their needs during that time. And then up here where this circle just popped in, that's where that we are trying to get that cow bred. And you also see that's where their highest needs are for what they need nutritionally. So it makes it difficult getting them bred if we don't have enough nutrition going into them. This red dotted line on here, this is just for an example. If we were feeding hay that had a TDN of about 56% and a crude protein of about 8%, you can see along this line, we're above the cow's needs during the second trimester, but we're below the cow's needs in the first trimester, and we're kind of over it and then under it in the third trimester. So we're about average there. But what this is here to point out is that if we have a group of cows and we're not treating any of them different, we've got them at all different stages of their lactation, because we have a continuous calving cycle year round, then part of the time, part of the cows are going to be getting underfed, part of them are going to be getting overfed. And so it's difficult unless we can sort those cows out to make sure that we're getting them at the right nutritional level. All right. So the same thing happens with those calves. They don't, when we're calving year round, we're also having those calves that are going to be at different weights. Do we have a way to separate those and feed them differently? Because, for instance, on here, we've got a 500-pound calf and a 900-pound calf. We're going to keep the average daily gain the same. We're just going to put in here at 2.5, just a moderate gain on those. We're going to look at total digestible nutrients on here again. We're at 75 on the 500 pounders. It drops down to 65 on the 900 pounders. Then you look at crude protein. The requirements are 14.7% on the 500 pounders, drops clear down to 9.3% on the 900 pounders. So if we're trying to feed them the same feed, we're either going to be underfeeding one and overfeeding the other, or if we feed for those 500 pounders to meet their needs, we're going to be way overfeeding the protein level on the 900 pounders. And what's the expensive part of the feed that you're providing? It's going to be the protein. And so we want to avoid doing that if possible. So what's another option? Maybe we can have 1 or 2 defined calving seasons. And by defined calving seasons, I'm talking that usually you're going to try to do it between 45 and 90 days. Ideally, if you can be at that 45 to 60 day window of having calves, it sure helps out with management of those calves and management of the cows. It also helps out so that we can have a yearly calving cycle, because if we're trying to meet those goals, we're going to be monitoring the pregnancies on those cows, monitoring the breeding on them, and making sure that they're having calves on a yearly basis. It also provides us with the ability to do sales in batches of calves instead of having them spread out throughout the year. There are some advantages if we can do them in batches, at least in my opinion. If you can sell a group of them at the same time, then you're dealing with people paying you at the same time instead of having that drug out throughout the whole year. Right. So this is just plotting out kind of on a calendar look. What's it going to look like when we go to choose a season to calve in? Should we look at fall? Should we look at spring? Usually those are the two that we look at. Most people don't want to intentionally have summer calves, and unless you're a purebred breeder, you're not really in favor of having December, January, February calves. So we'll look at fall and spring, for instance, here. So this is a fall calving calendar. So let's say we're having calves here in September. That means that come the next March to April, we're going to be weaning calves. Maybe we're going to do a little backgrounding on those. If we're grain finishing those, probably about December, those are going to be finished and ready to market. If we're doing a grain and grass, if they've been like on a pasture where you're supplementing them with grain, it may be February, something like that, when those individuals are ready to market. If you are doing grass-fed, you're probably going to be holding those on until about October or November, possibly even longer, in order for them to have reached enough size, because they're going to grow slower, so that they have enough finish. And there's been some research done. This data came from Kentucky, and they were looking at how long it took to finish out these individuals, and they started pushing some of those all the way when they were fall calvers, instead of finishing them in November or December at 28 months or whatever that comes out to. They started pushing some of them through the winter, letting them take that flush of grass in the spring to put a little extra condition on them quick. It seemed to increase their carcass quality. And the downside is you had to hold them clear through another winter and into the next summer in order to do that. But the carcass quality and the pounds of carcass sold went up. So it kind of depends on what your goal is for whether you want to look at doing something like that. And looking at this fall calving, I think there's some opportunity, especially if you're looking at a grass grain mixed method, to look at having some fall calves, because those calves are going to be getting weaned about the time that those pastures are starting to green up, and those calves could be turned out on a pasture and then supplemented some feed, and you could get them going pretty good through the summer with some additional grass and just a limited amount of feed as you head into the winter. we look at spring calving, this is the same type of a chart. And so we're going to say it's spring calving. Let's say we're talking about having March calves. So if we're having March calves, we're going to be weaning probably about September, maybe October. We'll maybe do a little backgrounding depending on what your setup is. And then those calves should be ready to finish if they're grain fed about June, or if you're doing a mixture of grain and grass, probably about August. And if you are carrying them on out and doing strictly grass fed, they're probably going to be ready about May of the next year. So this grass fed system does kind of work into spring calving probably a little bit better, because you can get them to finish out at about 2 years old, a little over 2 years old, a little easier than you can with the fall ones, just based on when the winter time and those restrictions on how much forage and how good a quality is available. It's a little harder to get them to grow in the winter in most situations than it is when they're out on the fresh grass. So how do we get those cows to start getting into cycles where they're calving as a group? Well, estrus synchronization is the biggest tool that we have available. And it sounds complicated. When you look at some of the charts, it gets complicated, but it really isn't all that involved. When you look at how many people are doing estrus synchronization, it's really small. It's kind of surprising. There's only about 5% of farms that have 50 or less cows in their herd that are doing estrus synchronization, and still less than 10% for herds that have 100 cows. So I think there's some missed opportunities here. And if you want to dive deep into estrus synchronization, we've got some cow-calf schools coming up this spring, and we're going to have sections on that. And I know I'll be teaching at a couple of them, and we'll go into a lot more detail than what I'm going to go into today. But it is a tool that can really help out if you're trying to get those calving seasons. So estrus synchronization basically just means that we're working with that bovine reproductive cycle so that we can cause the majority of the cows to exhibit standing estrus during a short period of time, so that we can get them bred in a small window to have more cows at the same time. Just to point out something on here, this isn't a typo. Estrus and estrus, when it's just US, that's when the animal is showing the signs of heat. That's a behavior. When it's OUS, that's the whole cycle on the cow. Just as a point, just to point that out. And estrus synchronization is a very effective way that we can get some of those cows that aren't cycling on their own, that are in anestrus after having their calf, to start cycling quicker and get that breeding season started earlier. So should you consider doing estrus synchronization? There's some pros and cons, but I think overall it's more positive than negative for most people. So some positives are you can plan ahead to match the dates where that you want to calve. So if you know what the dates are that you need to have meat available for people, that local beef ready for sale, then you could go backwards and you look at how long it's going to take to feed them to get to that point. Then you have to go on back and decide, well, how long, when do I need to get those cows bred to have the calves at the right time? So it gives you an opportunity there. You can shorten your calving season. You can cause these animals to come in heat quicker and get more calves in a shorter time, so that you're not out there as long. You're not out there every day for 2 months watching for babies to be born. You can shorten that up. And then you can also, I mentioned this earlier, you can trigger cows to come into estrus that are not cycling at the time that you're ready to breed them. It's not a miracle cure. It's not going to get every one of them, but it's your most effective tool at trying to get some of them to come in. And you have the advantage, you know, a lot of times we think of estrus synchronization with artificial insemination, and it works very well with that, but it can be used with natural service. So even if you're using herd bull, you can still use estrus synchronization to get more of those cows to calve earlier in the breeding season. The downsides on it, you do have to have some facilities in order to do it, because it is going to involve, for the most part, putting them through the chute typically about 3 times. There are protocols where you may only have to do it once, but most of the ones that you would use in order to try to get an anestrus cow to come into heat is going to involve running them through the chute about 3 times. If you have a subfertile bull, it's going to magnify that problem. That would be a downside. Doing a breeding soundness exam is a good way to help prevent this from being a problem. You can see in most cases, or many cases at least, if that bull has subfertile tendencies, then that might not be a situation that you would want to synchronize a bunch of cows for him to breed at once. Because more cows in heat in a shorter time for that bull could be an issue if he's subfertile. But there's been a lot of research looking at the ability of these bulls to cover cows when they are synchronized. And as long as that bull is in good breeding condition and has good semen quality, you don't see decreases in fertility based on having more cows in heat in a short period of time. A few things to remember about estrus synchronization. This first point's important. 365 is the days in a year if we want to have a calf once a year. 283 is how many days that cow's pregnant. So we subtract that out, and that leaves us with 82 days in order to establish a pregnancy and keep that cow on a year cycle. 82 days isn't a lot, especially if you consider that on average cow is anestrus for about 45 days after having a calf. And if that's the case, they can't get pregnant during that time. So that only leaves you a little less than 40 days to get that cow pregnant and continue on that 365-day cycle. With estrus synchronization, you can use it on non-cycling cows. Typically, they would suggest not going less than a 30 to 35-day postpartum. Ideally, going about 45 days postpartum meaning after birth of the calf. So if you go 45 days after that calf is born, on cows that have a body condition score of 5 or higher, the success rate's pretty good. When you start getting cows that have a body condition score of 4 or less, the estrus synchronization programs really go down, but so does the natural breeding. With cows with body condition scores of 4 or less, that the pregnancy rates are going to drop, and the days that those cows stay open is going to increase. All right. So with postpartum anestrus, so that's the time that those cows are not coming in heat after they've had their calf. And there's a number of different things on here that are listed. You know, many of these are things that we don't have a lot of control over. 2 of them that are really important that we can do some controlling with is the pre and postpartum nutrition and the BCS at calving, the BCS being body condition score. So when we look at the amount of nutrients that cow needs at the time we're trying to get her bred. They have a hierarchy of use on nutrients. So their body naturally takes them and uses them in this order. So you can see the first part of the nutrients are used for basal metabolism and activity. So having the heartbeat, the lungs working, being able to walk around. Those are all very important activities for that animal to survive. So that's the first part of the energy and protein that's used. Then we go on to growth. And those 2 and 3 year olds, that's why they stay thin a lot of times, is they aren't getting enough nutrients to take care of everything and grow and do everything else we expect them to. So after they get enough nutrients to do the growth, then they start putting on some energy reserves. They'll start depositing a little bit of fat. Beyond fat, then we have to look at lactation. So they're still milking a calf. And if they're milking a calf, that takes a lot of energy. As Al mentioned, having the highest milk production may not be the top choice. Yes, maybe they have the potential to produce more milk, but if we don't have enough energy to supply them to produce that much milk, then that also means that we don't have any energy left over for the next step, which is estrus cycles and pregnancy establishment. So Al's point on not having the highest milk production is definitely valid because it can make getting them bred back more difficult, especially if we don't have the quality of forages that we need. I'm going to jump back to this chart again and get to the right part on it here. So when we get back again and we look at where this line was, if we're feeding a cow at that level, that's below the level of nutrients that's needed to get her bred. We're not having enough nutrients present there, and it's going to be hard to get a cow pregnant, especially if she's coming in with a body condition score of 4 or maybe even a low 5. She's going to be really needing to come in with about a body condition score of 6 in order to have enough nutrients that her body can burn those to supply the energy and still get pregnant and cycle without having an extended anestrus period. So if you aren't real familiar with the body condition score system, here is a chart showing it. You can see by these pictures, we go from 1 to 9, from extremely emaciated to extremely obese. And most of the studies that have been done looking at reproduction with cattle have been concentrating on like your middle area where most cows are. And there seems to be a definite break between your body condition score 4 and 5. Seems like if you can have one at calving, and especially if you can have it still at a body condition score of 5 at breeding time, they're much more successful at establishing a pregnancy than one that's at a body condition score of 4. And you can tell here in the picture some differences there, but if we start to look at what decides what a body condition score of 4 cow is versus a 5, some of the traits are in a body condition score. The 4 ribs are slightly noticeable. The 12th and 13th rib are easily visible. The spine, you could run your hand down the back and easily feel the vertebrae. And the hooks and pins will have very minimal fat. Then if we start looking at the moderate one, we're starting to get a little bit of fat in the brisket. The 12th and 13th rib are not as easily seen. The spine, you have to put some firm pressure to start feeling this vertebrae. And the hooks and pins are starting to get cover of fat on them. All right, so I always like to put a little bit of economic value on things when I'm talking about it. So if we can shorten up our calving season by a little bit, let's say we don't really have a calving season, we have cows that are averaging maybe 13 to 14 months between each of their calves. And if we start to look at the value of that, a calf that's on a cow can typically gain about 2.5 pounds per day. A cow's reproductive cycle is 21 days. So just some real simple math, 2.5 pounds for 21 days is 52.5 pounds. So I'm saying that for each cycle that we miss on a cow, it's a missed opportunity of 21 days of gain from a calf. And if we put a dollar value of about $2 a pound for a feeder calf at this point, we're looking at about $105 of missed value for every cycle that we miss on that cow. So if we're missing 2 cycles on that cow and not getting her bred back at a year, but getting her bred back, at 13.5, 14 months, we're missing a couple $100 worth of value that we could have gained if we had been able to manage her in a way to keep her cycling on that 12-month cycle. All right, we'll get real basic here on synchronization protocols. We're going to talk about 3 basic protocols. There's the single shot prostaglandin. It's the kind of oldest one. It's been around for a long time. There are some good things about it. We'll talk about MGA, which is a feed additive. And then we'll talk about using CEDARs, which CEDARs may have the most benefit in this type of a situation for trying to get cows to cycle quicker. So just quick, prostaglandins are drugs like Lutalice, Estromate. Those are prostaglandins. And you can use prostaglandins to try to make cows come in heat quicker. It doesn't work on cows that have a low body condition score. So those cows that are under a 5 do not respond well to the prostaglandin shot. And if they're anestrus, they're not going to have the corpus luteum, which is the part that gets triggered to regress by the prostaglandin. That's not going to be present. And so they aren't going to respond to it. So if you have anestrus cows or low body condition score cows, this probably isn't the program for you. MGA stands for, that's what melangestrol acetate is. And that is a feed additive. It's only labeled for heifers. It's been around for a long time. It can be very effective. If you're going to use it, you need to have a situation where that you are bunk feeding these animals and they are able to eat a consistent amounts, because you need to monitor how much each of them get. So if you've got a situation where they're coming to a bunk and they're eating good, it would be an option. It's pretty inexpensive. You feed it for 14 days and then you take it away from them. You don't try to breed them right away, whether it's a bull or artificial insemination. After you take it away, you want them to come in heat, because if they come in heat and you try to breed them, it's a very low fertility on that heat. So you would catch the next heat that they came in. But it does help get them cycling and get them so that you can get them bred a little quicker. The last one we'll talk about, we'll spend a little bit more time on this, is the CEDAR. And this, the CEDAR is it's a controlled internal drug release device, and that's what CEDAR stands for. And you can see this white T-shaped device. You use this insertion tool. Those wings on it collapse. It sits in there, and then when you put it into the vaginal area on the cow, the plunger pushes it out. Those wings spread out, and it stays in the cow. And these wings are impregnated with a progesterone, and that progesterone is released then slowly into the cow. And these work very well at trying to bring cows into estrus that aren't cycling already. It also is our most effective option on cows that are at a low body condition score. It's not a guarantee that they're going to get pregnant or come into heat, but it it is our best option. It also is the most expensive option. And you have to run them through the chute at least twice in order to do this. There are options for both using it with artificial insemination and for using it with bulls. So it is a tool out there available that can be used to help you. When we talk about these synchronization products, we're basically talking about three things. And I mentioned some of these. GnRH stands for gonadotropin releasing hormone. And here's some different brands: Cisterellin, Factorel, Ovacyst. There's others, but they all do the same thing. We've got the prostaglandins, and a lot of us are familiar with Lutalice and Estromate, but Prostamate, InSync, those are other brands of it too. With either of these, you really have to watch the instructions on them. Some of them, most of the GnRH ones are 2 cc's. The prostaglandins are either 2 or 5, depending on the product you're using. For instance, the Lutalice Hycon is only 2 cc's, where the Lutalice is 5, and Estromate's 2, but I think Prostamate's 5. So it depends on what it is. And then the storage conditions also vary. So you really got to watch the label. Pretty sure that Ovacyst is room temperature, but Cisterellin and Factorel, I believe, are both must be refrigerated. The cedar, on the other hand, is a cedar, and it's the only one that's available in the United States. So it's there's only one brand of them, this Easy Breed cedar, and so that's the only one that you have to worry about. As far as cost on these, cedars cost about $14. You buy them in a pack of 10 for $140 is pretty much the going price on them right now. When we look at the GnRH, a shot of GnRH is going to range anywhere from $1 to $2.25 per injection. Prostaglandins are somewhere in that $1.75 to $2.50. And then you have a little bit of cost in needles and syringes, and one needle and syringe may cost you 20 cents. So what you end up with if you're going through a synchronization program is it costs somewhere between $2 and $17 per cow. That $2 would be if we did just a one shot of prostaglandin. The $17 would be more if we did a cedar with a shot of GnRH and a shot of prostaglandin with it. If you want to reduce the cost so you don't have so much in there, one of the best options is don't synchronize the entire herd. Not every cow has an issue with cycling and having a calf at 12-month intervals. So if you've got those cows that always cycle on time, always have a calf every year, skip doing those. Concentrate on those ones that are either thin or maybe had a calf late in the season, and those would be your best investment. All right, as we get ready to kind of wrap up here, just to kind of put the pieces together, and this may look a little bit backwards, but when we're looking at setting our breeding dates and controlling our breeding seasons to meet demand, we got to start out with where our demand is. So we're going to start out here on the right. What's the date that we need to have that product available to our consumers? And maybe there's something specific, or maybe this isn't that important of a piece. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're selling freezer beef, maybe you determine this and it doesn't have to determine everything else. But based on when we need to have the animal ready, we have to get those butcher appointments ready. And remember that we got to schedule those about a year in advance. Then we can take the time that we need the animal to be ready, subtract out how long it takes us to finish them, which is going to depend. It's going to take some experience to know, can we finish them in 15 months or is it going to take 18 months? It's important to have that figured out and know how long it's going to be, because then we can back that time out. Let's say it's 15 months and we back that out to when we need it to have when that calf needs to be born. And then we got to go another 9 months backwards to when we need to have that animal bred. So just in this example, let's say we need to have meat available June of 2026. Sounds like a long time out there, but we have to be looking that far ahead. So June 2026, we're going to have to feed that calf. We're going to do it grain finished, and we can do it in 15 months. So that means we'll subtract out 15 months from June 2026. Then we'll also have to take off 9 months for the time that calf is developing. And what's that mean? It means that this June of 2024, we need to have that cow bred in order to have the product ready and available in June of 2026. And obviously that's going to change depending on how you go about finishing your animals, how long it takes. You might be breeding right now in order to meet a June of 2026 appointment. And then as we wrap up here, just kind of reviewing. So we have multiple pieces to this puzzle that all have to fit together. We've got to work our demand. They've got to match our butcher appointments. They've got to match what our growth rates are and what our calving seasons are. All those have to come together if we're going to supply the demand at the right time. There are options available for us to help control those calving seasons so that we can do this. And those include those estrus synchronization programs. This isn't a one size fits all. Everybody's got differences in when they need their meat available. You know, it might not be something for everybody to put their animals through estrus synchronization programs and group them all together. There may be times where it actually does make sense to spread those animals out. And then the ultimate goal is that we put all these pieces in the puzzle together so that we can get the animal at the right stage at that butcher appointment so that the customer is going to have a good experience with local beef in return in the future. Here's my contact information. I've got a couple of resources listed on there. The OSU Beef Team's a great one for getting information. Beeferypro.org, if you're into the estrus synchronization program, they're a great one to provide that kind of information. They've got charts and they've got calculators that you can use online to help you plan out those estrus synchronization programs.
So we think about what the rest of the webinar series looks like going throughout the winter. I'm going to put the schedule up. So next month in February, we're going to talk about feeding our cattle, kind of looking at what Dean kind of teased into there. When we have a date booked well in advance, what are some feeding strategies that we can use? In March, Dr. Lyda Garcia is going to talk about some things we can do to add value to those carcasses and some considerations if we're going to sell retail beef versus wholesale, wholes, halves, and quarters. And then I think we should really be looking forward to that April 18 date. We get a producer roundtable. We're really going to just have a discussion about what works, what doesn't, some different experiences. I see Dale's on this evening. So we have Christy Morrow from Rocky Knob Farms in Morgan County, Brad Berry from Berry Family Farms in Fairfield County, Lindsay Hall from Maple Crest Meats and More, and then Dale Phillips from Phillips Meat Processing in Zanesville as part of that roundtable discussion. Really looking forward to that part of this program as we go throughout the months. If you have any questions about today's program in general, as we go through things, either reach out to the speakers, Alan or Dean, or you should all have my email address, ruff.72@osu.edu. I think that was a good primer to what we've been looking for in the process, right? Everything starts with good genetics when we got to get cows bred. We'll cover the nutrition piece in February. We'll talk a little bit about selling the product and some considerations along those lines in March. And then we'll finish with what I think will be a really good panel and get some kind of industry insight in April.